topics that be into?
Well, so the world of entomology is really awesome because there's a website out there like top entomology programs in the world, and so I just really started with that, and I knew there's two really great schools in California where I was born and raised, and one was the same school I got my bachelor's degree and my teaching credential, and I needed someplace else to go. And Dr. Collar and I have a relationship with that school, but I started looking at programs in other states as well as the professors at those. So I went to the school websites and then looked at the professors there, and I wanted to study aquatic insects, and so I just contacted the aquatic folks. And essentially I picked the top researcher in all the different aquatic orders and contacted them. And I went to school specifically to get a master's degree, and I would really encourage that, although Michael's going straight for a PhD. Don't mean to single you out or anything. But for me, my intention was to get a master's degree and then return right back to California, and that was so naive. And then I realized that the opportunities for me as really a taxonomist and the type of work I really enjoy was not going to, a master's degree wasn't going to allow me to do that. So I ended up staying there. The professor I was working for said, you have to finish your master's degree first and then apply for the PhD program. So I did, but I stayed there. So both my master's and PhD are from the same institution. And I picked it ultimately because it was a good place for my 2-year-old son to raise a child. That's why we ultimately picked that school, because it was a good place for Rosalie, my wife, and Chris as a youngin to have opportunities.
What was the question?
How did you find your...
Oh, how did I find my advisor, right? So, like I said, I sort of picked programs first, and this was before Google, so there was a time.
Did you hear that, Julie?
So, I looked at websites. I think there were websites that existed. So I looked at websites of faculty, there may have been brochures, of faculty at those institutions and identified faculty to contact. And I actually applied to UC Davis. But the person I wanted to work with was on sabbatical, never emailed me back. I went to visit, she was nowhere to be found, and I did not do a very good job of making other contacts during that visit. I think I was very sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing, and so I wasn't like trying to find an advisor while I was there. So they ultimately ended up kind of not accepting me. They didn't really submit a rejection letter, but they also didn't admit me. So,
Still on the way.
Yeah, but at Wisconsin, I identified someone. I got really interested in evolution when I was in undergrad, and so I picked someone who was doing like plant pollination, evolution sorts of things, and he had space in his lab, and that worked out. Thank goodness.
Okay, let's see. Well, I kind of have two stories because I have two advisors. One for the master's and then another for the PhD. So my master's advisor was actually someone who I had met and been working with as an undergraduate. So take advantage of those research opportunities that are here as an undergraduate. The school that I went to was relatively small, kind of public regional, and so there was lots of opportunity for that. So I started working in his lab as a junior, and we got along pretty well, and he had a project coming up that I knew about, and it was a good fit, and it was frankly just easy to stay, right? And I liked where I was. So I stayed with him for a master's degree, but that opportunity was how I met my PhD advisor as well. I thankfully went to lots of conferences starting my junior year and presented research at national conferences as an undergraduate, and that's actually when I met my PhD advisor, although I doubt he remembers that specific interaction, but it was a very nice segue when I went to email him, right? He said, hey, you may not remember me, but I met you at this conference, a few years ago. So I guess as far as kind of why I picked that particular advisor, it all had to do with the research, the particular project that came up while I was finishing up my master's. It was a very sort of politically charged time for the Chesapeake Bay management, which nobody in this room except for us will maybe remember. But at that point in time, the states of Virginia and Maryland were considering introducing a non-native oyster to Chesapeake Bay. And I was researching oyster communities for my master's degree just south of there. And we were very concerned about that in North Carolina where I was. And I knew I wanted to be involved in that in any way possible. And so there was a direct link, and I had skills that were useful to that PhD advisor coming in, which is another thing to sell. You gotta sell yourself. So yeah, that's what I found.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I had a similar two-part story. So for undergrad, I had a same professor who was teaching me plant identification. And I just fell in love with it. I just felt like the aging process for me stopped whenever I was identifying a plant. It was just like I couldn't believe I got to do that. And it really wasn't expensive. And so the month I graduated, I began what became my master's thesis. And it requires two things. You needed a canoe and a plant press. And I had a canoe, and my advisor had a plant press. And so I started camping and collecting plants all over the state of Virginia, and come to find out that would actually make a thesis. And so that was my thesis. And so that was one degree. The other one was a cohort, member of my cohort, or it's a couple years ahead of me, I guess, in a 4-year effort to get his master's degree finished, and went someplace. So I'd already sort of followed him to the same graduate school for my master's, and then so he goes to Virginia Tech and starts working under a fellow who's considered the father of two fields. And one of those fields was very interesting, and the other one was incredibly interesting. And so I went there and thought I would do ecotoxicology and did a full-blown literature review. Qui would have appreciated some of that literature. You would have liked that, Qui. But then I thought, well, I don't want to work in damage in ecosystems that are that disgusting. And in the second half of his career, he done restoration ecology, and I just started reading those papers and fell in love with it, and so that's what I did for my PhD. And I don't know if you found that thing that you just got to do, you're very fortunate, and if not, don't give up the quest.
Can I ask two really quick questions? Sorry, just my grad school experience totally different. So do you reach out to these faculty before you ever even apply to the school? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to identify, and they would kind of say, yes, I'm willing to take you on, and then you apply.
Yeah, I think the reason I didn't really get into data is because there was not a faculty member on the other side.
Of course,
Okay.
yeah.
And when would you say, does this take a while? So you'd recommend students could kind of start it in their junior year to then, or at least summer before senior, how long?
All of senior years.
Okay,
Yeah.
to just give time.
Because if you talk to a professor too far in advance, they forget.
Okay,
And they don't know if they're finding.
Oh, yeah, that's
Right.
true. They don't know if they're going to graduate a student and have spades.
Okay,
I had a
okay.
plant press.
Thank you.
Right, but I also just say, you find programs in various institutions, like me, every school I applied to, there was a department of entomology. But I found one person in the department that was the most interesting, where any of them probably could have worked, but you contact, this is my opinion, one person.
Yeah.
Because if you contact everybody, then that's an indication that you really don't know what you're really interested in, and then they're talking to each other, so that that doesn't go over very well, at least my experience.
Yeah, especially as you get further forward.
Mhm.
I was actually talking with Dr. Harlow earlier today about this before I realized she was on the panel. I am looking at a grad program, hopefully, that looks at seagrasses, and MIMS is one of the best schools for marine science. And they have two fantastic seagrass professors that are both retired/retiring. And so there's probably going to be a seagrass professor in their place, but we don't know for certain. And I don't know how to go about that situation. Do I just sort of find a different aspect of what I'm interested in and try and find it there? Should I look for other programs in addition?
Just remembered something. Good. So I happen to know several of those professors, graduate students that have since moved on and are now professors at other universities that do similar research. I should contact a couple of them. I don't know where they are. It's swampy, but they would be doing similar things, and they're at, it's not fits, but they're at good schools.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point in general too, like when you're searching, if there's somebody you might have in mind, look on their lab page for alumni, for former students, because they might have moved on, and especially if they're at a school that runs PhD programs, they're former students, depending on how long ago they finished, they might be in another lab somewhere, and it might end up being like this scenario where someone you're interested in might be on the verge of retirement, but their students are still doing similar work, and so you can get sort of that experience.
And I also think it's a bad idea to choose a program that doesn't 100% guarantee you have the person you want to work with.
Mhm.
Like, you don't like apply and hope they hire a Seagrass person, you know? That's like, then you just might end up miserable.
All right, so here's a sort of follow-up question, not on the agenda. But now, if you have identified this person that you really, really want to work with, but you have not met that individual, how do you reach out to them?
Right.
What do you do? And what does a good first contact email look like?
So I asked a colleague of mine who is a professor at UVA and takes PhD students that same question. And she basically said she wants to know you're serious and you're the real deal immediately. So don't just say I'm interested and make her write back and say, when are you graduating? What's your GPA? Do you have any research experience? Like, you need to put it all out there. Attach a resume that has your GPA in it. If you've taken the GRE, put those scores in there so that it's like their first pass of this kid can't even get into the program versus this kid's got some things going on. This kid's promising. So you want to give them lots of information about you immediately. Like, you want to talk about what research you've done. You want to talk about what you're interested in that they do. But you also want to prove that you can get in.
Mhm.
Yeah. Totally agree with all of that.
What were your emails like, Julie? Do you remember your initials to Kansas?
Yes. So I don't know if my fellow panelists would agree, but I think professors like when you fluff them up a little bit. I think for me, it was trying to find a balance of fluffing him up and fluffing me up. So you gotta definitely, I agree with Dr. Steven, like market yourself 100%. So like fluff up that CV and make it look amazing, and even if you just helped out in the lab one day, like totally blow it up and make it sound amazing. But also just do your research beforehand and let them know that you've thought about it a lot and done your research and know a lot about them, because they're not gonna waste time on you if you don't know anything about it and you just kind of took the headline of their research and thought it fit. So
I also think it's important to be interested in a scientific question. It's okay to be interested in an organism, but if you're like, I just love dolphins, you know, that will not resonate as well
The
as
title and body of your email is just
Right.
I love dolphins.
Exactly. It doesn't resonate as well
What
as
not
I'm
to
so
do.
intrigued by animal behavior.
Yeah.
So
They're just not plants. That's
you
the-
could say I love plants, but then you also have to back it up with
Yeah,
why.
explain why.
Mhm.
Right.
So I have a dark cloud that I make sure my students hear about, and so it's just a recommendation when you get down to that final list of 1 to 3 faculty members who seem like it could maybe work out. It is so valuable if you can happen to get them to give you the names and contact information for a few former students.